STEM itself at the University of Sheffield, I've got some lovely colleagues here representing each of those acronyms and also beyond, who can talk a little bit more about it, including our speakers. But it's been interesting that there's been some attention on this subject of STEM, especially in the based on this report that was produced, I think, by the Department of Animal and Plant Sciences, looking at the links between slavery and beloved or much respected figures such as Isaac Newton. So, and that's created quite a bit of a controversy, particularly amongst some of the more maybe right-wing or conservative establishments. So there is kind of a genesis of STEM and decolonization debates here at the University of Sheffield as well. So it's really, I'm really excited to learn a bit more about that. Before I hand it over to Sally, just a reminder that this is being recorded. Obviously, we're such a small group, so we don't have to be too strict with the whole kind of mic on and off thing, but do try and keep it kind of on when the speakers are speaking. Any issues, questions, contributions, feel free to use the chat. The first hour will be our speakers.
Thanks so much, Nabila, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We really appreciate your interest in this topic and coming in for the small group discussion today. So thank you so much to you all. And again, I hope it's nice weather where you are, but yeah, kind of melting here in the attic, but that's not too much of a bad thing. So my name is Sally Kaywood, as Nabila said. I'm currently based at Urban Studies and Planning at Sheffield. I'm also affiliated with SID as well, who've been running the decolonising events. I've also really come in as a kind of real foray into this. I by no means claim to know a lot about this topic. I really want to be open about that, again, with the caveat that I am also coming from social science. However, I've also worked with engineers and especially WASH engineers. So I worked because I work in the WASH sector academically, I've worked with many colleagues, both practitioners as well as researchers and policy advocates. And I've also worked in a civil engineering department. So it's really great to try and blend these disciplines together. And that's something that I'm really interested in doing. But obviously that throws up both opportunity, but also some challenges in terms of knowledge production, how we work. And then I think it's really important to think critically, no matter where we're placed and who we are, especially as scholars and researchers and practitioners in the global north or in the UK context. So that's really where I'm coming from. I'm really interested, really grateful to colleagues coming, such as Cor and Gladys and Sarah and others coming in from the kind of WASH side, because it would be great to get your perspectives on some of these debates today, not even just from an engineering perspective, but more broadly in terms of knowledge production. And you've been doing some great work on that. So thank you so much for joining. So we'll open those discussions up a little bit more later, particularly around the WASH engineering side of things. But I think without further ado, it'd be great to get stuck in with our wonderful speakers today. Hila, first of all, would you like to do a quick round of introductions of everybody? Yeah, I can start off on my screen and be a bit dictatorial with that, so if that's easier. So first up is Jocelyn, who is also one of our speakers. So Jocelyn, if you'd like to introduce yourself, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally and Nabila, for inviting me. I'm Jocelyn. I'm a second-year PhD student here at the University of Sheffield in the Department of Animal and Plant Sciences. And my PhD is kind of looking at Indigenous peoples' lands and kind of global conservation policy targets and kind of how do they contribute, can they contribute? And yeah, I'm really interested in kind of like the decolonial aspects of things, because obviously there's any sensitive issues around indigenous peoples and their inclusion or their exclusion rather in conservation with many historical problems. So that's part of this is me trying to navigate how I feel in this space of trying to do work that's historically colonial with kind of global spatial approaches, but also acknowledging or wanting to improve on these things. And yeah, thanks. I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone.
Thanks so much, Jocelyn, and also representing your broader group who've been doing some great work on this topic. So thanks so much. Andrea, another speaker, is next on the screen.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally and Nabila, for inviting me, and hi, everybody. My name is Andrea Jimenez, and I used to also be a research fellow at SID, and now a lecturer at the Information School at the University of Sheffield. And I also come from a social science background, and I look at the role of technology and innovation in the international development sector. And I guess I've been invited to speak a bit about my research around a decolonial lens to the role of technology and digital technologies in development. So I'm very excited about being here and having discussions with all of you.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks for joining us today, as always. Cora, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Cor Dietvorst. I posted something in the chat. I see I spelled my name incorrectly, but I've got to put my glasses on. But I'm an information manager at IRC WASH, an INGO based in The Hague, the Netherlands. I've been in the WASH sector for over 30 years, I think. And last year, I co-organized the first ever WASH webinar on decolonization of knowledge with Euphrasia Luseka. I think some of you know her. And since then, I've been trying to establish a decolonization agenda at IRC and the rest of the WASH sector.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Cor, and thanks again for joining us for this great discussion. Really appreciate that. And Sarah.
Hello, I am Sara Vannini. I'm also a lecturer at the Information School. I'm a colleague of Andrea. And my research is somehow connected to what Andrea was doing. So I'm also working on the role of technologies for development and for social change. And so I'm very interested in this topic of decolonization because I usually have to deal with social groups that have been historically excluded by the decision-making process. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And also then we have the other Sarah, Sarah Cummings.
Yeah, thank you. The other Sarah here. Yeah, I'm a researcher working at the Knowledge, Technology and Innovation group at Wageningen University, and I'm particularly looking at how the CG works with the private sector there. But I guess all of my professional life, I've been a member of the Knowledge Management for Development Community of Practice, which has been going since the year 2000. And along with another colleagues here, for example, not only Core, but also Gladys and Sravidya, who are members of the Core group. And we've just recently been organizing a series of sessions, developing an action plan and with a roadmap for decolonization knowledge. Thanks. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks for joining us, Sarah. That's great to have you. Francis, hello.
Hello there. I'm Francis. I'm a postdoc in geography here in Sheffield. And I'm a bit of a, I do a combination of things, but I'm a glaciologist and a planetary scientist. So I jump between planets quite a lot, primarily between Earth and Mars. And I guess my interest was piqued in this topic because I'm acutely aware of the narratives around exploration, and including the very present issue of sort of colonial narratives around exploration of Mars in particular. So I think it's a fascinating topic and one that I want to do good for, because there's a lot of things happening at the moment that seem to be going in the wrong direction in that sense. So yeah, thank you for the invitation as well.
Thanks, Francis. And I really love your background picture. It's great.
That wasn't deliberate, it just appeared.
You must just have that permanently behind you all the time. That's great, thanks. Nelly.
Yeah, hello. So I'm Nelly Leblanc. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at University College London, working on sanitation in several African cities. But by training, I was trained in biology, agronomy, environmental sciences, and soil sciences especially. And I guess I had to do a bit of science studies and also social sciences to cope with the violence, extractivism, and racism that are at the core of these disciplines. So I'm still on a journey between disciplines, trying to find my way, and I'm really happy to be with you today. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for joining, Nelly, and best wishes to everyone in the Overdue team as well. Excellent. So next up's Gladys. Welcome, Gladys.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, everyone. I'm so happy to join you today. My name is Gladys Kemboi. I'm from Kenya. My background is from social sciences. As a Chem4Dev member, championing and addressing the issues on the uncomfortable truths in higher learning institutions. And there's quite a lot that we need to decolonize in terms of issues that are facing students, especially the female ladies, yeah, even in the work sector. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Gladys. That's great. And you said you had a slide to share later, which is excellent. So we'll pop that on after the first speakers. So thank you very much. Ankit.
Hi, thanks for inviting me, Sally and Nabila. I'm Ankit Kumar. I'm a lecturer at the Department of Geography at University of Sheffield. And I work on impact of renewable energy and sort of marketization of basic services like electricity access, water, etc. In the global south, and the knowledge politics within it. So positioning of different kinds of products and companies from around the world based on premise of higher quality or lower quality of product, which is obviously based on a historical idea of hegemony of knowledge, etc. So that's what I've been working on, and I currently am running a small project on looking at how solar products are positioned in sub-Saharan African markets, solar products from China, India, and the West position itself themselves in comparison to each other in these markets on the premise of quality and standards. Thanks. Excited to be here and to hear from everyone today.
Thanks so much, Ankit. Great to have you with us. And passing over to Dorothea.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here. My name is Dorothea Kleine, and I'm the co-director of SID, the Sheffield Institute for International Development. SID's been on this journey for a while, thinking about how we can decolonize our knowledges, our research, and also structures and practices. And this is obviously something that will be an ongoing journey, but colleagues like Nabila and Sally have done a tremendous job in also fostering dialogue. And for this particular event, I'm just also excited that we're reaching to across faculties. So also into the physical sciences and engineering, and many of us are social sciences like myself. My area of research is social science, is coming from the social sciences, looking at, again, digital in global sustainable development. So looking forward to the discussions.
Thanks, Dorothea. And yeah, especially thanks to Nabila, because Nabila's the one that's been organising these events recently. So big shout out to Nabila. Wafa, hello, welcome.
Hi everyone, my name is Wafa. I'm a third year PhD student at University College London in the Department of Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy. My research is on the provision of sustainable energy services in refugee camps. I'm looking at that specific context. My background is in engineering, so I just, before the PhD, finished an integrated kind of master's in engineering. And that was kind of the basis of which I came into this more social science kind of approach to looking at technology and the social, economic, developmental impacts of technologies. While kind of decolonizing or the decolonial perspective isn't kind of a central theme of my work, I guess through my engagement with these conversations within my department, and I want to say specifically a book called What Does Science, Technology and Innovation Mean from Africa, which is a collection of essays, which really for me was like a paradigm shift in kind of understanding what science, technology and innovation was and how it, you know, it has different forms in different places, and how kind of colonialism has shaped our understandings of that. So I guess that kind of met my personal interest in the topic of science and colonialism and the effect of colonialism. And yeah, I've just been kind of trying to, I guess, bring that lens somewhat into my PhD wherever it can fit. But it's really good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us, Wafa. Nice to meet you. Amardeep, hello, welcome.
Hiya, I'm Amardeep. I'm a first year particle physics PhD student at Royal Holloway. I'm currently working on the dark matter direct detection experiment called Lux Zeppelin, which is situated in South Dakota. I am an abolitionist, and I am very very interested in how we kind of apply that to our everyday lives and how we practice that. And I've always sort of been interested and involved in, issues surrounding the gender disparity between, in STEM fields, especially within physics. So naturally, sort of decolonization in STEM is something that's always been quite relevant, and I've always been very interested in, seeing what that actually looks like.
Great, thanks so much for joining. Some really interesting perspectives, so thank you. Next up we have Juliet.
Hey everyone, I'm a PhD student as well in my third year at the University of Sheffield in urban studies, but similar to Wafa, my undergrad and master's was integrated and was in civil engineering, and I worked a bit as a drainage engineer and looking at kind of flooding. And I think I was at the same time doing a lot of campaigning around climate in the climate movement, and there was a lot of discussions about decolonising the climate movement and what that looks like in terms of kind of international NGOs gatekeeping certain narratives about what was allowed to be kind of criticised. And so I think the kind of combination of those two things have led to my current PhD, which is in the social sciences and has been a challenging transition, which is looking at what would a climate just response to flooding look like in the UK. So a lot of focus on kind of epistemic knowledge and the role of experience as expert and experience. So I think strong parallels with lots of decolonising thought, but yeah, focus on climate justice.
Thanks for joining, Juliet. It's great. And Janavi, hello, you're up next.
Hi everyone. I'm Janvi Phalke. I'm a historian of science by training. So slightly different to many of the practitioners in the room. I've been looking mainly at 20th century physical sciences. So, experimental nuclear physics, aeronautics, and statistics. I feel a bit of an imposter, but let's find out as we move along in the afternoon.
Not at all an imposter, absolutely not. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to the discussions with you. Thank you. And next up we have Srividya. Sorry if I've pronounced your name incorrectly.
That's okay. Yeah, it's Srividya. Hi, my name is Srividya Harish, and I'm based in Bangalore, India. And I am part of the KM4Dev community along with Gladys and Sarah here. I also work for ActionAid International, an NGO based in UK, or now headquartered in Johannesburg. Yes, what am I interested in as part of this, INGO network, who is also looking at decolonizing aid in particular and decolonizing now, you are interested in power, you are interested in privilege, you are interested in access, you are interested in all these things, plurality, diversity. And I think more than Jahnavi, I feel a bit of, maybe not an imposter, but maybe an intruder. Let's see how the afternoon pans out. I'm also part of the KM4Dev community of practice, as Sarah introduced, and we have also been talking about decolonizing knowledge and decolonizing knowledge management as a field. So it would be interesting to see intersectionality, because knowledge is like universal, right? So we were kind of talking about, after the last, what we are calling knowledge cafes, that we need to tailor the knowledge cafes to now talk about decolonizing knowledge in different sectors and different, so that would be my, what does decolonize, because if knowledge is power, then who wields this power and who controls those spaces and access? So would be really interested to hear opinions here. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks so much for joining us. And again, not at all intruding. And it's so good to have you here, especially to bring in the different perspectives from academia and policy and practice. So we really appreciate that. So thank you very much. Ishan is up next.
Hi, I'm Ishan. I'm doing a PhD in particle physics, working on dark matter. I'm actually on the same experiment as Amardeep mentioned earlier in South Dakota. I also work on education, on race and colonialism with a few projects. I'll mention them later, Race in Britain and the other one's called Connected Sociologies. Yeah, I work on science and I work on colonialism, but I don't usually work on these things together. So I don't do science and colonialism. I do science, which is my day job, and then I do colonialism. But I'm looking forward to these conversations, and yeah, thank you, Nabila, for inviting me.
Thank you, Ishan, for joining us. It's great. Next up, we just got our last four, I think, in here. So Chisenga, you're up next.
Hey, hi everybody. My name is Chisenga, and I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Sheffield. And my research is on gender data, feminist data. So interested in the context within which gender data is produced and used. So I'm also interested in the effect of coloniality on statistics and digital data production and use. And my background is in computer science and ICT for development. And my research now takes on a primarily social perspective.
Thanks for joining us, Chisenga. Great to have you here. And our last two to introduce, I think, we've got Andrew.
Hi, my name is Andrew Lin. I'm a lecturer in biomedical science at Sheffield. I'm here in my capacity as the Director for Equality, Diversity, and Inclusion for my department and for the new School of Biosciences, which will be formed in the fall. I guess my main objective is to make sure that all students feel welcome and can be engaged with the course material, students of all backgrounds. So I guess I'm basically here to learn about all the different approaches people are taking and if any of them might be applicable to our curriculum.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for joining us as well. And last but not least is Niranjana.
Hi, I hope I'm audible. Can someone confirm? Okay, great. I've just been communicating with Nabila that I'm at a place with really poor internet connectivity. So apologies in advance for if I drop off, and apologies for also having joined a bit late. So I might have missed the start of what we were actually supposed to say. So I'm Niranjana. I'm a postdoc at the London School of Economics. My current project has actually got not much to do with the engineering or science. It's about coastal fissures in Chennai. But my PhD was on water infrastructures in Chennai, where I was studying mostly the work of engineers. So, and I mean, as we all know, probably already, the role of colonial knowledge systems in the creation of water systems and water engineering is quite widely studied and it's been written about. But I've also taken a bit of interest, my PhD delved a bit more into forms of technical knowledge that aren't recognized as engineering in India. Ajanta Subramaniam's recent book, Cast of Merit, really makes and delves more in depth into it. I don't believe I've gone that far into the subject in my PhD or in my papers, but that's the part of it that I'm really interested in right now, and which I hope to pursue as well, on why do certain forms of knowledge get to be called engineering and others are called either technical knowledge, plumbing, etc., etc. And I mean, this of course has very specific salience in India, but also around the world. Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us, and no problem at all with the connection. And if anyone else has any problems with connection, feel free to turn off your videos or whatever is best. Thank you, Niranjana. We just had Dan nip in as well. Dan, hello. We're just doing a quick round of introductions. So would you like to say hello and who you are?
Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Brockington, and I co-direct Sheffield Institute for International Development with Dorothea Kleiner. And thanks ever so much to the organisers for joining us. I must switch off video, I'm afraid. I'm working at home, but I'll be listening happily.
No problem. Thank you, Dan. Excellent, Nabila, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Oh, wow, those are really good introductions, everyone. I'm so impressed and thankful Niranjana seems to have made it. I've been following her progress, so, and just such fantastic insights. I've been scribbling to make notes, but I'm so happy it's also being recorded, because the thing that struck me, I don't know about you, Sally, is the interdisciplinarity and the kind of cross-cutting. The fact that everyone seems to feel like they're an intruder or an interloper, myself included, is in of itself very interesting, because that's also the case when it comes to, it's super pertinent to the idea of what Niranjana raised. What is knowledge? Who gets to speak on which discipline's behalf? You know, I've had so many experiences where people will think, and myself including, then will think they're not expert enough, in quotation marks, to speak on a particular subject area. And I think that's very much deeply embedded within colonial flows of information and kind of structures of how we value and think through knowledge, whatever that may be. So really, really interesting introductions, everyone. I'll get right to it because we are just about a little bit over time. Our first speaker is Andrea Jimenez. I'm so happy to, Andrea and I are good friends as well as colleagues, and we spend most of our time basically talking about how we can try and decolonize things. We don't really have any, well, I don't really have any answers so far, but I'm so happy to introduce her today. She's here at the University of Sheffield, as she's already introduced, and you know, I'll give the floor to her because I know you have a lot to say. And where are you? Yeah, I'll open the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Nabila, again, for the kind words. So I just want to share my screen, and just let me know if you cannot see my screen. Can you see my screen? Yeah, and if I put it on presentation mode, can you still see it? Yeah, perfect. Okay. So let me just, okay. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's really great to be here with all of you, and I'm going to go straight to my presentation. So I am interested in the digital development and innovation, and how these are presented as tools or solutions to some of the most complex challenges facing our world today. So I pay close attention to which actors are involved and how, which narratives are shared and why, and which policies are promoted in the international development space, and I look closely at that. So it's probably not a surprise for you that both digital innovation and data practices have increasingly become the focus of many development interventions, whether that's in the socio-economic development sector or in the humanitarian one. And a few decades ago, this field was dominated by a modernization logic, where science, technology, and innovation were inbound from somewhere else, usually the West, and were transferred to post-colonial countries in the hope that one day they will be developed. And in this process of transfer, there was a monopoly of whose mission it is to civilize or save these contexts, and how they should change to fit the model that speaks of development. And as a result, technology was more than just a tool for this alleged progress, but it arrived as well as a tool for racist domination. Now, I think, in my opinion, what's important to kickstart this conversation is to try to explain what we think technology does. And so I'm going to give you what my perspective is. And so I think that although technology is presented as a solution for many of the world problems, technology is ultimately a tool that multiplies human capacity in the direction of human intent and is not a substitute for it. So this is, as Kentaro Toyama will explain, this means that technology amplifies what is the direction of human intent. So although the dominant thinking around digital technologies is that they are here to help us solve problems in the world, we ought to examine the broader structures in which technologies operate, because those may be amplified through technology. Now, there are many ways in which digital technologies are embedded in colonial structures of power, and these examples exist both in Western countries and post-colonial ones as well. I'm going to mention briefly three examples which I think are quite obvious, in the hope that we can expand on them, and then we can bring new ones into our discussion. The first one is when digital technologies in development interventions are supported and managed by big technology corporations or governments to police and enforce the surveillance of oppressed people. So here, I'd like to mention the work by Mirka Maideanu from Goldsmiths University, where she examines the United Nations World Food Programme's recent multi-million partnership with Palantir Technologies to implement refugee registrations involving biometric data. And there are also digital government initiatives like the centralized Aadhaar system in India. In these examples, technology is presented in theory as a way to enhance efficiency and transparency, yet people's personal and biometric data is collected and stored as a way to measure and control racialized bodies, monitoring their every move. The process whereby a refugee, in order to get support from the UN initiative, needs to provide their biometric data is one that is full of coloniality. And likewise, the process by which refugees or stateless persons are excluded from the Aadhaar platform is also a way of categorizing and excluding at the intersections, at various multiple intersections of oppression. And it exacerbates new layers of exclusion and it amplifies existing ones. Another example is when digital technology and innovation are presented as tools for solving some of the most complex social problems. In my PhD research, I looked at organizations known as technology and innovation hubs, which are forms of collaborative spaces for technologists and entrepreneurs. They became very popular a few years ago in the development space, and they were funded and supported by many international organizations. And one of the most championed features that hubs have is that they tend to organize events like hackathons, which are usually 2-day workshopy type events where people can develop prototypes for various types of problems. And sometimes these are very complex social problems. And now these events hold a very attractive message for policymakers, entrepreneurs, and researchers alike. Because if an app can solve the problem of corruption, then there is no need for the government to invest so much effort on policy. There's also international development organizations can also claim impact, and researchers can quickly access grant funding to explore how the app works. Now, at the core, this view, in my opinion, ignores much wider historical, cultural, environmental, and political structures. It reduces complex social problems as possible to be fixed via quick technological fixes. And this, in a way, is invisibilizing the colonial past, redirecting the attention to a quick fix. If you think of the ways in which former colonial empires tend to hide their past through different positive rhetorics of how they were actually benevolent colonizers who brought peace, roads, and culture to the colonies, and who are now part of a commonwealth, this colonial narrative becomes clearer. The final point is when digital technologies and data practices are implicated in global racial power relations. According to Sun Hang Hong, what's data and raw data tends to be portrayed as impartial machines that reveal better ways to handle the world. And this way of thinking ignores the unintended consequences of algorithms and the biased historical data sets that can sometimes be used as input to feed these machines. Now, there are many examples out there around how technologies, whether that is artificial intelligence or search engines or predictive tools, are being used to inform government decision-making, are actually perpetuating and discriminating against people of color, whether that is in the judiciary system or in the police, whether that is in the health system, as part of a welfare system, and more. The algorithms get input data that is biased. So what the algorithm learns as ground truth is problematic to begin with, right? And yet, in the name of technological objectivity, these issues become black boxed and opaque. And as a consequence, the datafication of society is ultimately shaping what counts as knowledge, and by extent, what counts as society. And this, in my opinion, is not a technological issue, but it's a political one. Therefore, the design from the design, the development, and the deployment of technology, we have to think about this as profoundly political. So, moving forward, what does it mean to decolonize the role of digital technology and innovation? And here I'm just going to leave you with a few provocations. The first thing is that I hope that what we can bring into the conversation is that digital technology needs to come in line with a broader decolonial conversation. Oops, sorry, I went back. There you go. It needs to come in line with a broader decolonial conversation. So we cannot work on decolonizing technology practices without thinking about decolonizing the world at large. And I'm sure most of you here will agree with that. Decolonization is not meant to be a simple harmonic process. The first lines of The Wretch of the Earth by Frantz Fanon say, decolonization, which sets out to change the order of the world, is obviously a program of complete disorder. But it cannot come as a result of magical practices, nor of a natural shock, nor of a friendly understanding. I think it is very important to understand not just how technology and digital technologies can exacerbate or reinforce colonial legacies, but also how we as researchers, those who are doing research around digital technology, can sometimes also reinforce coloniality in our own situated practice, through our own ways of looking at the world, through our bodies and our positionalities. And I say this because I think sometimes we do adopt we'll adopt words like inclusion, co-production and participation, seeking to avoid conflict and find consensus in a sort of happy-go-lucky kind of way. And this, I think, as Chandra Mohanty would call it, is sometimes a harmonious, empty pluralism. So sometimes, although we can be very good at identifying the perhaps banal and problematic forms of digital technology practices, like the ones I have showed here today, the 3 examples I've shown, we are sometimes severely limited when it is us as researchers located in the global north who reproduce modernity in our actions, although our words will say differently. So my invitation for a discussion today is to critically reflect on how, as researchers, we can adopt practices that reinforce coloniality when we're trying to bypass power, inequality, and difference, whether we are acutely aware of this or not. We cannot expect that decolonizing the role of technology won't come in hand with decolonizing ourselves. And we ought to consider what this means and perhaps rethink before we claim to be decolonizing something. Because maybe from where we stand, we cannot. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for an excellent talk. That was really, really good. Thank you very much. Really good food for thought there, and some great quotes and reflections as well. So, I'll just pass back over to Nabila to do the Q&A.
Great, yeah. Oh, I hope Barbara can rejoin us. Yes, Andrea, the sad thing about Zoom is that you can't hear the thunderous applause that you deserve. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Just in the interest, I guess we had initially thought we could have some clarificatory or immediate questions after each speaker, but I think because of time, if anyone has any immediate kind of questions about a speaker's presentation, maybe pop it in the chat box, or we can kind of leave it to the discussion part, which is the second part of the workshop. But I can already see some great comments on Andrea's talk already. Next up, we have Ishan Khurana, soon to be doctor, from UCL. He's already introduced himself, and I'm really, really excited to hear what you've got for us, Ishan. I'm also going to share the website for Connecting Sociologies, which is, I think you remember Ishan said his night job is working on decolonization. So that's Connecting Sociologies. It's a really fantastic initiative that Ishan's part of, and I'm going to share the link here. Over to you, Ishan.
Thanks. I'm also just going to share the link to the slides, or I think I've already shared it with Nabila, and that if that's in the chat box, you can follow the slides along. Yeah, so just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give a quick background about me. So I had an intro in my talk, and I've already done it, just to contextualize what I'll say, and then a brief discussion on STEM graduates and the neocolonial economy, and then trying to think about access to science and social justice, and then finally decolonization. Okay, so yeah, so my background is that I've been at UCL for 7 years now. So yeah, next year I should hopefully be doctor. unless I fail, which would be terrible, and I'm quite worried about that. I work on machine learning methods for the LZ dark matter experiment. So here's some pictures of me on site. So a lot of my work involves big data science, algorithm making, programming, debugging, the sort of stuff that some of the stuff that Andrea mentioned, but in this sort of specifically scientific context. If I go into industry, that's the sort of jobs that I would be doing, is making those algorithms. I've also worked a lot on science education projects for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. So this was 4 years sort of during my undergrad, starting my second year. I did a lot of workshops in schools, youth centres and libraries in around London, Hackney, Peckham, and a few other areas as well. And then from there, sort of moved a bit more into organising education projects on race and colonialism. And I've linked some of them here, some of them that I work on. Race in Britain and Connected Sociology are the two that are sort of currently ongoing still, and Contented is a youth program, which I've also been involved with. And yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I work on science and I work on colonialism, but not really together. I don't really think about those things together. But today is the day, I guess. I have thought about it before and I have prepared, but yeah, I don't really usually work on this. So one of the things I want to talk about, as I said, was the main ways in which I think we as in STEM departments support a neocolonial economy through training graduates in STEM, so big pharma, banks, tech companies, weapons companies, and so on. So just to do that, I wanted to situate the UK economy and think about it through grad destinations. So these are some of the biggest companies in the UK, and we can look at it through the FTSE 100, for example. It just doesn't take that long to do. Simple Google search will give you this information. So just listing a few of these companies here, you've got Rio Tinto, Glencore, Royal Dutch Shell, HSBC, Lloyd Banks, all of these places. And then you also have your other ones which aren't listed in the UK, but are big employers. So people like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and so on. These are the major employers for STEM graduates. Largely, they require STEM graduates. So both historically and currently, the state takes the stability of this corporate sector quite important, it's a matter of national security almost. And BAE employ 35,000 tax-paying workers in the UK. So it's and all of these companies are central to the goods and the applications used in everyday life. It's central to the state and revenue and the public sector. So STEM trained labor is central to most of the industries. Okay. Yeah. So just to repeat that again. So technology in the contemporary neocolonial economy is kind of what I've been thinking about. So just some examples again. You can think about genetically engineering seeds to infringe on seed sovereignty. So the work of Monsanto and Bayer to produce seeds that don't reproduce, and then these are used in development projects around the world. The global finance, debt and capital management, STEM graduates are essential to this, to do a lot of the quantitative modeling and other things as well. Speculative trading of derivatives and the impact of that on agriculture and other markets and access to goods. So they've linked some work there, which you can follow if you like. Defense and surveillance tools mentioned earlier, and then also Rio Benjamin's written about this a lot. And so again, you can see this is you need STEM trained people to be able to do this. And then obviously oil, gas extraction, new consumer technologies, iPhones, and so on. I've also linked a lecture on the global colonial economy that we've done at Connected Sociologies by Paul Gilbert from Sussex, and he talks about some of this work on how we can think about the UK economy and the global colonial economy. So I think if you look at all those industries and all those sectors, STEM, it's obvious that they're sort of central. STEM trained people are central to that work. And so just as a quick data plot that I got from the UCL website, these are the destinations for UCL physics graduates. So physics graduates don't necessarily go into all of those different industries, but most of them, 28% will go into accounting and finance, IT, technology and telecoms, and then, and so on. So beyond coming up with new technologies, which I think is one of the main things in which we hear, we often hear that that's what science does. We come up with new technology, the state pays for it and the private sector capitalizes on it. Or asking questions about nature, which is what we love to tell ourselves, that we ask the fundamental questions about nature. That's not what we're paid to really do. I think that's not why we're given that much money. I think the reason that we're given that much money is because we provide a service to the economy, obviously. And we make that claim as well whenever we say we justify ourselves to the government, I guess. So for the most part, it's maybe provocative, but I think STEM departments in the UK universities are training centres for these workers. So training centres for British industry, advanced capitalist industry, if you like, or more appropriately, neo-colonial industry as well. So that is one of the main economic outputs, I think, is our main output is graduates, feeding industry, people that have an undergraduate degree. We also produce graduate students with PhDs, so people like me, who would then go on and work in more technical, sort of advanced jobs, if you like, data science jobs, what I would be doing. And so they either go into industry or they'll go into training other students. I think this is one way to look at it. But also, I don't mean to underestimate the coloniality of the research itself. So just to caveat, the research itself is also has implications, colonial implications, and so on. And the research impact is one of the most important things for funding agencies. And the research agenda is set by the states. When the state's doing this economic planning, this is quite important for, and you can see this in documents that you read on sort of the government's goals for research and development for science. So with this in mind, that this is what we're doing, I think it's just maybe a bit hurried, but with this in mind, I just want to think a bit about the outreach work and then about the ethics conversations and social justice conversations that might take place in the department, which I've been involved in for a while, and then also got a bit tired of. So then started doing race and colonialism outside the department. So within, at least in my department and in my experience talking to other people in different departments, an ethics and social justice conversation ultimately leads to the need for more public engagement, the need for outreach and diversity programs. So this work, the work of outreach, done under the sort of auspices of making scientific institutions more accessible, is mainly done along the lines of inspiring these people from disadvantaged backgrounds, going into areas and inspiring people into doing science, getting them to ask the right questions. Not much questioning goes into asking why these conditions exist in the first place. And so I also just want to emphasize that any conversation around this stuff usually leads to doing more diversity work, which is quite common in, I guess, corporate diversity programs as well, where also I think largely because people that are developing these don't have an adequate understanding of race and racism and colonialism, how that shapes the modern world. This is something that you'd naturally jump to. It's not their individual faults. It's kind of obvious that this is what they would do, given the sort of dominance of this kind of approach to these problems. But I also want to say that I do think this work is important. That's why I did it for 4 years, 5 years, and I still do it, because I think the exclusion of working class students, both white, non-white, especially girls, working class girls, from being able to learn physics is not right. As someone who loves physics, I don't think it's fair that only a small minority of the population globally are able to enjoy science and engineering. It's a lot of fun, I think. Although I've painted the sciences as these training centers for corporate Britain, we do also learn science. And I think there's value in that. I think that's something that we want to retain, is reform and retain probably, but we do want to still be able to have spaces where we can learn, teach, and discuss science. So unlike, a corporate diversity scheme for something like BAE Systems, where I think there isn't much to be redeemed, we don't necessarily want to keep a weapons company after, if we have the choice to keep or not keep. I think there's something in science that we do want to redeem and keep. But going back to the question of inequality and justice, I think it's always interesting to me how this is the dominant approach that's taken. And something I've been thinking about recently is how, for example, on the slide I have David Cameron's arguing for more people to go into science. The Sewell report recently on race and racialization, actually not racialization, the value meant in racialization, but it was on racism in Britain, I think, talks about the need for more training in STEM, and that as a way to sort of tackle the racism problem. And I think this is okay, obviously, as I said, but the ways in which science is implicated in producing this inequality, injustice, both domestically and internationally, is not really something that we discuss. I don't think the inclusion, just simply the inclusion of these people, which might sound obvious, is enough to challenge the relationship between STEM and sort of global neocoloniality. And whilst I think this work is important, I think to reckon with race and racism, we sort of need to break our faith a bit in blind sort of blind faith in ENI committees, EDI committees, and sort of engage in a serious reflection in the modern discipline's current and historic role in sustaining colonial oppression, which, as Andrea has already mentioned, there's loads of examples of it, and I've of course sort of linked a few in my slides as well. That's something that somebody would have to do. We could go through it in a workshop like this, but I guess that's the job that I think doesn't get done before people jump to solutions, which then often end up being about inclusion. But with that in mind, I do also want to say that I think decolonization, I think science can play a positive role in society. It will obviously be might be different, but I also think that I often think that when we jump into these conversations, it's not people that have access to science and then they're saying, well, what are we going to do with science to do decolonization? It's often people that I've had these conversations with don't have access to science. They don't have access to the tools and thinking and the ways of learning and research and all of this that we do have from science. And I think that can be quite useful. At least that's what I hope my work will be, is taking some of the things that I've learned in science and doing social sciences at decolonization and trying to bring them two together. But so just in that light, something that Roa Benjamin mentions here is this quote, which I think is quite nice. I'm not going to read it out. I'll sort of leave it there. I think it's quite useful to think about this, in that both science and society are sort of co-produced and co-configured, and realizing that we sort of have to change both at the same time. So with that, I'd ask how would these incredibly powerful set of institutions of science, how should they be run? I mean, these are crucial questions for democracy. Who are the stakeholders? In what sectors is innovation needed? Is it going to be technology? Is it going to be surveillance technology? Is it going to be something else? And what does that innovation look like? Who's involved in those conversations? And again, Roa Benjamin's work on this is I think quite interesting, which I don't have enough time to go into. And you could also just read the book. It's probably better to do that. So and then also just lastly, where will capital and consequently scientific resources be allocated for this? What jobs do STEM graduates do, and what will their labor be utilized for? So I think a broader decolonization of society will influence decolonization of science, and I also don't think that STEM is going to be the vanguard for this decolonization, if there is a vanguard. But regardless, I think this quote by Roa Benjamin is quite useful. I do think STEM needs to take more responsibility, but I maybe just view it cynical by now. And then just to wrap everything up. So I think we need to investigate present day relationships with present day coloniality and STEM. But we also, while we do this, have to, and I can say this from experience, navigate inflated egos, identities around what it means to do science and so on. And the political economy of science itself. Often it doesn't matter what the scientist wants to do. That's just not where the funding is going to be allocated. Our experiment is important because technology contributes to the economy, and we don't get to decide that largely. I think we do apply for grants and stuff, but yeah. So I think, yeah, then the capital is required. Capital is required for science, and capital allocation determines what science gets done, as well as what scientists do within and outside of the academy. So I think, yeah, democratizing and decolonizing capital allocation is one of the tasks. So I think I'll leave it there. Hopefully that was useful.
I don't know if that's picking up on the mic, but I'm clapping. Again, fantastic points. I mean, Sally and I were kind of wondering how long to make this workshop, and I'm now thinking we should have made it a bit longer, because I have so many kind of micro questions. Everyone kind of, people, if you have questions that directly pertain to the presentation just now, do feel free to kind of pop it in the chat box and we can come back to it. But just an initial comment is, I'm really glad you raised the C word, capital, Ishan, because frankly, a lot of these debates, we get to it, we allude to it, but we I don't know, for some reason, shy away from it. And I think the outcome of that is the kind of normalization of neoliberal terms like diversity, inclusion, and so on and so forth. Both Andrea and Ishan raised these terms that are often confused with the decolonial effort or struggle or challenge, and actually in turn reinforce capital flows of power, flows of capital and power. And it's also really interesting that you didn't just look, or your presentation, Ishan, wasn't just about knowledge itself, but the kind of output or the kind of industrial, what's the word, equation of STEM subjects and the drive for STEM subjects. So that was really fascinating, learnt loads. Next we have, and I'm really grateful that you're joining us from India, because I know it's quite late there, Dr. Janavi Falke. Apologies if I've mispronounced that, my apologies. She's the director of the Science Gallery in Bengaluru. I'm going to share the link for the Science Gallery because it's a really unique institution that's worth checking out. And I'm going to give the floor now to you.
Thank you, Nabila, for the introduction. I'm just going to try to see if, okay. So thanks very much, Sally, for inviting me. It's fun to be with you. I'm already kind of anticipating some of the conversation ahead. Thank you, Andrea and Ishan, for raising the questions you already have. You made my task easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to raise a bunch of questions that come from my own training, and I'm a historian of science, less so. I mean, I am trained both in history of science and technology, but I'm going to speak as a historian of science today and open up some boxes. So ask more questions than provide answers, because I think it's in the discussion that, we will probably find good ways to grapple with this question, because as we started out saying, this isn't an easy problem to tackle. It's an ongoing, gradual process. It's an enduring process. It's an enduring politics that we all need to engage in. So the question I'm going to ask, the first question I'm going to ask is, what is colonial about science? And that's an important question to actually come to terms with, because while politically, I would, find little to disagree with what Andrea and Ishan said. As a historian, it becomes difficult to grasp ideas like coloniality of today, for example, because colonialism is a historical experience which has enduring impact on how geopolitics was and is and continues to be organized. And when we lose the specificities of understanding historical moments, historical processes, what ends up happening is that we drag terms to explain or carry so much politics and so much work and advocacy and activism that at some point they come to mean nothing, or worse still, they get co-opted into a discourse of power, precisely the terms like inclusion and diversity, which have become the bane of our lives. And so I would in fact call so if we're talking about decolonization of STEM, then we must ask ourselves the first question: what is colonial about science? Right? We need to understand what it is that we find disagreeable and therefore needs to change. Is it a politics that is about democracy, that's about deracializing current politics, etc., or is there something specifically colonial that we wish to get rid of? Coloniality of today, for example, would not come close to capturing if we look at epistemology, and if we look at wanting to unpack what is colonial about science, about technology at all. So I think that's the first question we need to answer. I'll hint at some answers as we go along, but I'm happy to take up more of a discussion later, because it's not that I know all the answers, but I think I have a preference for the direction of travel, and I would love to be able to discuss that frankly with the lovely group that's assembled here. So I'm going to ask the second question, and I promise to get back to what is colonial about STEM in a couple of minutes. When did science become Western? We often talk about science in the 19th and 18th, 19th century, the imperial experience and the spread of European knowledge-making practices across the world as somehow, in a way taken for granted, that there is something Western about science, or there's something European about science. And if you start talking to historians of the early modern era, what you increasingly find out is, and in the words of a colleague of mine, the voice of science was being trained in Europe even as it was being recited in what were colonial territories or imperial territories. So in that sense, then one asks the question, why is it then, if this knowledge came together in imperialism, that its cultural ownership lies with Europe or with the West? And I think this is a question that needs unpacking, because that's the route to answering the question, what's colonial about STEM at all, in order to then come to the present moment to begin to decolonize any of it. Often the debate is couched in a debate on modernity and how societies other than Europe began to modernize. However, many historians, myself included, would strongly argue that it is not at the end of or in the middle of the imperial experience that societies other than Europe started to modernize. Imperialism itself was a part of the experience of being modern in these territories, right? So the experience of industrialization and what later came to be called as progress was experienced by parts of Europe, or part of the population in Europe, not even all of them. It is the self same experience that was also a part of the experience of colonized territories. It's just that what manifested in these territories was different, and therefore, as scholars like Genovese have argued, slavery is a modern institution. It's not, or slavery as practiced in the America or the American continent, on the American continent, is a modern phenomenon and not one that is a leftover of a previous era. And therefore, if science and engineering, so if the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution, which kind of are a part of this larger narrative, are being shaped at this very within this very process, then how is it that they come to be identified as Western? So is it only based on the cultural authority that lay with Europe at that point of time, the cultural and political authority, the power of the gun, so to speak, or is there something else to it? And here we find the work of early modernists actually quite important, because when we start looking at the data that fed into Newton's work, or the data that fed into the work of Linnaeus, or other natural philosophers who we anachronistically call scientists today, then we see that knowledge from elsewhere was actually quite important. The adjacent question to that, and this was in fact asked by Joseph Needham, where he says he doesn't have the question mark, the question mark's mine. Well, when he wrote in the middle decades of the 20th century, what he said was all rivers of knowledge flow into the ocean of science. And what he meant by that was that there are knowledge systems that exist across the world. And today, in many ways, we are arguing for the legitimacy of these knowledge systems, or at least there's a discourse on it. Do all rivers of knowledge actually flow into the ocean of science? Especially since I just made the claim that, the data or the knowledge that fed into the work of Newton, people like Newton and Linnaeus, did actually come from elsewhere also. We often characterize knowledge systems elsewhere as alternative and vernacular and indigenous. Does that make sense? Alternative to what? Indigenous to what? If for a moment we were to accept that science as we understand it today is historically a European knowledge system, highly debatable, but nonetheless, if we accept that, then isn't that indigenous to Europe? why does it work the way it does? Why does it spread the way it does? And why is it accepted the way it is? And why has it been accepted the way it is? The second sort of, so what are these other knowledges? Are they alternatives? Are they sort of preceding science? Are they in, and often what we also find is that knowledge systems from elsewhere are discussed also in terms of incommensurability, especially when the colonial encounter is discussed, where there is an antagonism, an incommensurability, there is something, there's a clash, right? Like there isn't an exchange, there isn't a dialogue between knowledge systems, but there is a clash. We have used these frames to understand our mapping of how knowledge has grown in various parts of the world, and and how it in effect either feeds into or doesn't feed into or clash against what we today understand as hegemonic knowledge systems. The next question I'd like us to ask ourselves, and I'm aware that I'm not answering much as I'm moving along, but I'd love to answer this. As I said, I do have some thoughts on how to begin to answer these questions, which I'm happy to share. What is then decolonization? Is it, where does decolonization stem from? Why do we want to decolonize? Is it about equality? Is it about access? Some of the questions that Ishan raised. Or is it about understanding the deeply embedded power in the cultural authority that comes with knowing and practicing science, technology, and engineering as we largely accept today? So what is the starting point of decolonization? Why do we want to decolonize STEM? What does it mean to decolonize STEM? And who, yeah, so let me first deal with the two questions. If the starting point for a discourse or for a call or for a political need for decolonization lies in anti-colonial sentiment, then what about the colonial experience is it that we wish to undo, right? And I don't think it suffices to talk about power and cultural authority alone. I think there is something deeper than that, and Ishan alluded to it, because there is something in the very way the knowledge is generated, formulated, that is brought into question when we take anti-colonialism or as the starting point for decolonization. So it's not simply about making science accessible to a vast majority of people, but in fact questioning the very authority that science and science, technology, and engineering enjoy, which is a difficult position to occupy. And Ishan kind of skirted around it a little bit, so I'd love to actually get back to that in our discussion, because yeah, so it's not simply about who gets to do science. Does it matter? I mean, this is a question that we've discussed since the 60s in the women's movement and in feminism, where, you know, the inclusion of women in history, the access to power for women, does it matter? Is it about participation in an enterprise or in a power structure that's already been set up, which does not in many ways represent the concerns of a larger group, the planet, and by a larger group I mean, you know, the large populace of the world, which doesn't really have access to the tools of research, sometimes also the fruits of research. And you know, a case in point is the access to knowledge of vaccines and also vaccines themselves at this very moment across the globe. So does access to the tools of science or the products of science, does it matter? And if it does, when does it matter? I'll bracket who and what funds science and the market and university, because Ishan has already referred to some of this. University, and I don't think you know, any of us have a problem accepting, for example, that the market universities, journals are all in a sense embedded in an existing system of how knowledge is organized. And therefore, what the question we also need to ask ourselves is what are we talking about when we say decolonize STEM? Are we talking about epistemology? Are we talking about decolonizing knowledge? Or are we talking about decolonizing the establishment, the scientific establishment, with its tools of research and the outputs of that research as well? How does one do this? And this is my, I think my last slide. How do we do this when across the globe today, and this has been the case for the last 100, 120, 130 odd years, when there is a shared ontology or a shared worldview where those disadvantaged or marginalized by the epistemology as well as the scientific establishment still do buy into the worldview that has been created, by the hegemony of science. And I'll stop. And I think that it's the last question that I'll stop by discussing the last question, which is very important. So a couple of slides ago, I talked about how decolonizing epistemology is a difficult and dangerous place to be, because the question at the end of the day, we also need to ask ourselves is, are all knowledge claims equal? What does it mean to decolonize knowledge? If simply access to and inclusion of the disadvantaged or the hitherto left out is not the answer to decolonization, and decolonization also does call for looking at epistemology quite seriously, then one question that we need to consider quite seriously is that there will be competing claims, and there are already competing claims. This debate is being acted out in front of our eyes for vaccines, for climate change, for a range of other questions that affect our day-to-day lives, but also the future of the planet and future generations. How does one deal with this? With that, I'll stop and happy to discuss further.
Thank you so much. That was so fantastic, and exactly the kind of provocation that we sorry, my video was exactly the kind of provocations that was hoping to kind of constitute this discussion. So thank you so much, and really, really important that you brought in the historical aspect of all of this as well. I am just I'm aware of time, and it'd be really, really great to kind of get to some of those questions that you've raised, Janavi. So I'm going to just speed along to introduce our next speaker, who is a PhD student from here at Sheffield, Jocelyn. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, please correct me. Who's speaking, who I'll open the floor to now. Thank you for joining us from Singapore. I realize it's late there.
No worries, thanks Nabila. So I'm Jocelyn Su, and I'm a current PhD student. I'm also part of a working group in the Department of Animal and Plant Sciences, or maybe it's Department of Biosciences now, but so we've been, and I'm just going to be talking briefly about kind of the work we've done in the department that Sally and Nabila alluded to earlier, this guide that we've produced. So the working group, we actually started off in 2019 at the start of my PhD, actually, reading Decolonising the University, the book, and we took it chapter by chapter, and being a group of actually like professors, postdocs, lecturers, PhD students, and a few undergraduate students as well, coming from a primarily natural science background. I think there's definitely a lot of learning and unlearning for us to do. So we took a chapter each week, and we were discussing them and trying to understand them, coming from, I guess, our knowledge systems of STEM and stuff like that. And when we finished Decolonising the curriculum, the book, that nearly coincided with the time of like the George Floyd's death and kind of this renewed interest in Black Lives Matter and kind of decolonising the curriculum and Roads Must Fall kind of a movement. And so we were thinking about what do we want to do with having finished reading and wanting to actually practice or try and implement what we were reading, realizing as well, you know, kind of like decolonizing is you have it's a much bigger sense rather than just the curriculum itself. We've got to deal with the world, political, hegemonic systems, economic systems, capitalism, and all that. But in the capacity of a department in a university, what can we do? And we also debated actually whether we wanted to use the word decolonizing. So we're reading Tuck and Young. Decolonization is not a metaphor as well, but we decided that in the end, it's kind of like a known term, and there is some sense of what we're talking about when we use the word decolonizing. So instead of saying decolonizing the curriculum, we decided to kind of just say we're applying a decolonial framework. And I'm going to share the guide in the chat so people can look at it in their own time if they're interested. But yeah, so we came up with we talked about in this. So this guide is actually meant for people in our department, for different professors, lecturers, and postdocs, primarily to understand what we mean by decolonizing and how we interpret the term and why then it's necessary for those in positions of, I guess, transferring knowledge, what they can do to try and level the playing field, so to speak. And I think it's actually gained quite a lot of traction. We converted it from like a static PDF to like this Google site that's also currently being revised at the moment, actually. And we were presenting this at like a Decolonization in Practice conference that held by the University of Birmingham last October. And I think that this University of Sheffield's medical school also had kind of like a decolonizing chat that one of the people from our group also presented at. And it's also, as mentioned earlier, it got some coverage in the Daily Mail and the Telegraph in May this year, which is a bit more unflattering. But you know, I think like, despite kind of the, in some ways, right-wing backlash, our head of department was still quite supportive of what we're doing, and in general, we're still moving ahead with kind of trying to introduce decolonial frameworks, ways of understanding the world, trying to shift the paradigm for students, and I think that's really positive. And then coming from me and a few other PhD students who are also part of the working group, we realized that this guide really caters more to like lecturers and people who are in positions, teaching positions. And it doesn't necessarily always apply to PhD students. And so we thought perhaps we could try and do something within our department as well to kind of introduce concepts of, for example, a positionality statement, or like kind of a reflective chapter at some point in our thesis. Which I guess is normal for most social sciences streams, but it's not at all an understood or known thing in natural sciences. And yeah, that's about it really. I'll just end here, and if anyone has questions on what the working group's doing or anything else, just feel free to pop it in the chat. Thanks.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Thanks to everyone. We're really going through a lot of really important ideas here. So thank you very much, Jocelyn, for sharing, and everyone. As you'll probably notice, we are eating in a bit to our discussion time, but I'm really happy to say we've also got another presentation actually from Gladys, who really kindly shared that just before the session. So thank you, Gladys, for stepping in. So this will be our last presentation before we have a bit of a discussion. We will probably have to shorten that in some way, so apologies in advance for that. But what we'll probably do is focus more on the second and third question that we raised at the start of the workshop, and then give a bit of space for Q&A. So before that, though, I'd like to introduce Gladys. So thank you, Gladys, and I will just put your slides up as well for the last talk. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm going to discuss about decolonization and STEM in Kenya, and why I'm focusing much about decolonizing the mindset and also addressing the uncomfortable truths in our education system. So looking at the case of Sub-Sahara, focusing in Kenya, there was a study which was conducted in 2018, and it shows that women in the STEM in public universities, there's a gender disparity ranging from 30 to 35%, and only few women participate in STEM courses and graduate. But there were some contributing factors that led to poor performance of female students in STEM, which includes this gender stereotyping, the sexual harassment, family responsibilities, and corruption. So as we look at the gender stereotypes, we believe that only men are the ones that are supposed to be doing the STEM courses, ranging all the way, especially those young girls who have been raised in the village and those who are coming from the marginalized communities compared to those in the urban setup. Next slide. So currently in Kenya, there are some mentorship programs for girls, which you ask for a mentor, but now it is only accessible to those in the urban setup. And fortunately, those students who are still in the marginalized communities where they don't have access to such STEM opportunities, it's still difficult for them. And now we need to look at what is the way forward and the pathways that we need to address these issues when it comes to decolonization of knowledge and STEM in Kenya. So I think this is one of them. Attitude towards STEM. We have the perception that these are difficult courses ranging all the way from kindergarten to high school. And those who have the opportunity, who are in the best schools, they're able to have to access the best facilities to be used in the STEM. And we need to address these issues and change the mindset that yeah, it is possible and it is doable for women. So we are discussing earlier on about gender stereotypes, especially those women raised up in the village. You know, we don't have such access to STEM, and we only access such opportunities once you have finished university. But depending on the kind of the school where you have gone, so it's so difficult again. That's why we need to look for the way forward. How do we create more communities of practice to allow and also those women who are more marginalized to access such opportunities? Yeah, in there. And then, so now we need to decolonize the mindset. Like when I was in high school, we only believed that mathematics, sciences belongs only to men. And it was so challenging, like most of us, we could major in humanities. So like now we need to challenge this perception, and we need to have mentors all the way from kindergarten, high school to university level, at least so that we create more awareness and the importance of having STEM in place. Next slide. And then now the question is, where are the mostly left behind? These are the marginalized students, young boys, they don't have access to these STEM opportunities, and they even lack access to internet connectivity and poor infrastructure. So comparing, we still have a long way to address these issues, and also how do we decolonize these? And then now the pathways towards decolonizing STEM, we need to create virtual village hubs to facilitate access to STEM opportunities and programs. We also need to create communities of practice for STEM in village. Those who have perhaps maybe they have advanced, they come to the village and give back to empower those young women and boys. And then also we need to create a safe knowledge space for all. We have seen the issue, the challenges in terms of sexual harassment in higher learning institutions, which has been a challenge to many young women to pursue these careers in STEM and other sciences. And also we need more knowledge donors. These are people who could volunteer and to mentor and coach students who were passionate about STEM. So yeah, thank you. And one of the parting shots that I would like to share to our women in the rural home that yeah, you women and young girls, that we are powerful and our voices matters. And this has been our action for KM4Dev in decolonization of knowledge. And I'm so happy and proud to say that KM4Dev gave me an an avenue to champion for this decolonization of knowledge in Kenya and also to address the issues that are facing students. Yeah. Thank you, Sally. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Gladys, and also for preparing something, you know, really last minute and stepping in and joining us. So thank you so much for your time. That was great. Excellent. So I will hand over to Nabila now to have the last 30 minutes. We know this is quite jam-packed, so thank you again for sticking with us on this.
Hi everyone, I hope you can see the screen, which just basically shares the question that we kind of, can everyone see the screen? Just checking. Great. Yeah, thank you so much, Gladys. It was really, really good to hear from a, you know, a non-global North context as well, and a kind of more localized picture of what's going on with STEM. Because that's another question, you know, when we talk about STEM and decolonization, I guess there is a nuance in the debate depending on the positionality and the kind of the global positionality as well as our own identities. So Gladys, is really, really useful to hear your presentation. Thank you. As Sally said, we are a little pushed for time, but it's only because we had such an embarrassment of riches in terms of speakers. So I hope the conversation can continue between yourselves if you all agree to share emails. But and there is a really engaging debate or discussion going on in the chat as well that I see. Thank you, Sarah and Janabi for contributing your views. Really, I mean, now is the space we're opening up the floor to clarificatory questions. If anyone had a burning question about a specific presentation or point that was made, I know that the speakers themselves cross-referenced each other, so feel free to go ahead and start that. And this question here: how does colonization in STEM play out in current contexts? So, you know, we've already heard about part of the situation in Kenya amongst women in STEM from Gladys, but it would be really interesting to hear about how colonization in STEM plays out in, for example, India, or for Janabi and our participants who are there, or in Peru, where I know a lot of Andrea's work is done, or, you know, anywhere really. Yeah, so I'm just going to open up the floor. I think we'll try and aim for around 10 minutes. But don't want to kind of dictate the conversation too much. So yeah. Would anyone like to jump in? Just turn off your mic and turn on your mic, sorry. Yeah, Jocelyn, I can see you raised your hand.
Hi, yes, I thought I might just jump in. I thought it was really interesting what Isham and Andrea and everyone else presented, and bring in the links to capitalism as well. I think I see a lot of that in Singapore, which is where I'm from. So being a former British colony, it's strange because it's probably one of the few countries where colonialism is kind of celebrated. So we just recently celebrated 200 years of colonization. And so I guess discussions about decolonization is not anywhere near what it is being discussed, at least in the UK or other parts of former colonial countries. And so I do see like colonization in STEM just kind of playing out in the way you expect it to be. So STEM fields are still accessible to the privileged ethnicity, which is the Chinese ethnicity. And, you know, there's a lot of biometric data collection. I wanted to ask Andrea actually if she could just quickly answer how she sees biometric data collection as colonial, but that, you know, we are quite technologically advanced. They want the vision for Singapore is to be a smart nation. So there's a lot of technology being used in governing everyone's lives. And yeah, it's not always to everyone's benefit, and we don't even have proper discussions about racism. And I think, you know, when you're still at this state of discussions, then it's quite difficult to even move forward. And I just wanted to start with that. Thanks.
To quickly jump in there, maybe Andrea, if you're happy to answer that. And also there was another question earlier that I think Saraja asked around what alternative models, especially around machine learning, there might be. So I wondered if we could just bundle those two for you, Andrea, if that's okay.
Sorry, I'm here. I'm just looking to share a link of an article where this research is coming from, because it's not my research. It's by Mirka Madhyanu from Goldsmiths University, and I'm just going to share it here. So this is in the context of the project whereby biometric data is used to register refugees, and so it's the way that they receive the services. They have to register using their biometric data. And in this article, she shares what are some of the kind of logics that are as part of this particular process. And so there's a logic of securitization. There's a logic of also when you're collecting the data, but you don't that data isn't actually going to end up benefiting the people whose data we're talking about, but it benefits another institution. And in this case, we're talking about Palantir Technologies. We're talking about this big tech company that has been associated with militarization, with Cambridge Analytica, and so on. So it's in that particular context where she examines how biometric data is reinforcing colonial legacies. And I don't know the case of Singapore. It might be interesting to see if somebody else knows about it. And just in terms of the other question that you mentioned, Sally, was it what are the alternatives? So initially I was thinking what examples I know of attempts to decolonize technology, and I can think of a few. But then after listening to Janavi's talk, it kind of really made me think more we need to be more reflective about it, rather than trying to find, look, here are 3 examples that are showing how alternatives are taking place. I just wonder if maybe we should actually really be thinking about what do we actually mean about what is colonial about science. I think this definitely has struck me. So I could share the examples again on the chat, but I wonder if we could just maybe also think about that, because I think it's really important to come to grips with that particular question.
Thank you, Andrea. I think, thank you for your kind words. It's, so when we were grad students, we read this essay by Melvin Kranzberg, a historian of technology. He's got, I think, if I remember correctly, 6 or 7 laws of technology. And I think the first one is technology is neither good nor bad nor neutral. And that speaks to what you said, right? Which is that it augments, it amplifies in the direction in which you want to take it. So effectively, it's doing the work you want it to do. And I think it's really important to note that, right? Like that here is a body of knowledge. And I mean, that's why, when I tried to answer Sarah's question, which is a seemingly simple question, but it's a tough one. At the end of the day, how do you deal with this, right? Because do you want to say that all claims are equal? Do you want to say, do you want to fold all kinds of politics into decolonization, right? So basically, what is specific about this politics and why is this important? Because this comes with a historical experience. And, it's folding it together with too many other things dilutes it. And then the answer is usually that the question that Sarah asked, right? Like, why does diversity and inclusion become the easy tool to answer all of this with? It's like, oh yeah, we'll get more of you in the room. We'll put you around the table, right? Like, it's like we saw with women and, okay, put more women around there. And then what's her name? Sheryl Sandberg comes and says, lean in, right? Like, and it doesn't matter that women's interests are not on the table. It doesn't matter that, the pink tax is not under discussion, or it doesn't matter that, safety of women on the streets is not, or the urban design and women's safety is not a question. Or, so that's the thing, so those are not the answers. That doesn't mean one doesn't do that. But I think there's one sentence, and I'll stop after saying that, which I included in my answer to Sarah's question, which is that until you belong to a category that you yourself cannot dissolve, meaning until you cannot produce knowledge about yourself, or until your questions or your epistemological concerns are not a part of the larger knowledge-making process, it doesn't matter, right? Because you could come from Hawaii and participate in making a bomb which will be tested on one of the islands, right? So is that access to science? And it may well be, for some may well be, but like we need to ask ourselves, right? Like, so that's why sort of just being a bit more specific. Why is science colonial? What about science is colonial? What is decolonization? What are the origins of decolonization? Is it anti-colonial? In which case, what kind of anti-colonialism? Anti-market politics is, I'm not saying it's distant from it. We know these things are embedded. Historical processes are embedded. And you know, how did universities become colonized spaces? It's because they're deeply embedded in the market. But separating these things out is very important, because otherwise we don't get a handle on it. We don't understand why, you know, we are not able to identify specific stakeholders that need to be addressed, you know, in these processes that need to be addressed properly. It just all becomes a thing of anti sort of, you know, so in oppositional politics. I think it was Catherine McKinnon, at least when I was young, who used to say that. Oppositional politics, right? Like, so is that sufficient? No, it's not. We need to rebuild something. Then you go back and then you're like, okay, what am I left with? Alternative knowledge systems, indigenous or vernacular, what they're called as, right? Like, no, but I actually want a good vaccine. So what does that mean? How do I buy in? What are the terms on which I buy in, right? And how do I break open this thing that has been given to me? It's not easy. I mean, I have no answers, but I think the tougher we are on ourselves, the more seriously we'll be taken, because it's so easy to dismiss someone who comes in with an oppositional politics, right? Yeah, we are doing diversity, we are doing inclusion. See?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in, Janavi. Thank you so much. These are fantastic points. And because we are a little bit pressed for time, I think I know we've got Srividya, Sarah, I think Juliet had her hand up, correct me if I'm wrong, and Gladys, who all want to go next. So in addition to what you're planning to say, or if it's relevant to Janavi and Andrea's points anyway, that specificity is kind of the reason why we wanted to set up this workshop in the first place, because a lot of the topics that I've been thinking about, and my colleagues here, are kind of decolonizing the university, or decolonization rooted in a more social science tradition. And some of the way, if you're a qualitative researcher, an ethnographic researcher, or a post-colonial researcher like myself, some of these questions are inherent and more, let's say, obvious. But when it comes to STEM, I think disentangling it, or unfolding it, as Janavi says, is really important. So perhaps if the people who speak next, if you try and think about that as well, what is specific about perhaps the area of STEM that you engage with, or STEM overall, and is it important is there a different path for decolonizing STEM than there is for other kinds of knowledge? Do feel free to kind of think about these questions as well. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, it was Srividya next, and then Sarah, and then Gladys.
Okay, thank you. So when I was hearing Andrea, Janavi, Shan and all, one of the things that I kept asking myself is that how are we actually defining science, right? So I remember, when I was at school and you had this science extracurricular things. So one of the questions that they asked was, what is science? And the answer that they gave was, oh, science is a big question mark. So their definition of science was the spirit of inquiry, as is being called, right? So, and I was just going back to that and thinking that, is it more useful for us if we kind of make this distinction between science and technology, the marketable science, the science that gets associated with capital and capitalism? And where is exactly the issue? Is the issue around science itself, right? So, or what are the issues around, the coloniality, if that is a word, of science itself, or what are those issues that are around, the technology part of it, and I think that's critical. So yeah, so that was basically I was thinking. So if you are saying, for example, very practically, very operationally, that one of the ways that that you really need to, or one of the solutions, very simple one maybe, is to bring or amplify, again, I don't like, as Janavi, the term alternative or vernacular or indigenous, because what exactly are they? But unheard, so amplify unheard voices, if we can say that, as at unheard theories, as at unheard voices, as at unheard narratives. So if that is one of the things that we want to do, so where do we want to do it? Is it in the space of science, as you know, academic models, schools, theories? Is it in the space of technology, which is now associated to capital, which is easy, which is tough, which is difficult? Who are the stakeholders? What will we do? Yeah, so I think that was where my thoughts were. Thanks.
It was Sarah next.
Okay, so I'm going to go and try to be quick. These issues are so complex and it's difficult, you know, to look at them all together. I mean, I agree with a lot of the speakers that I think that the role of capitalism and the market is really important. You know, in my own work, I'm looking at, if you like, this science, technological, economic paradigm, and how these interests are quite often those of Western countries, and that actually this sort of imaginary of the knowledge society is obscuring the sort of political and historical aspects of science. And I think this is, you know, if you look at the SDGs, there is local knowledge, for example, is only mentioned once, and the model of knowledge is all about this sort of scientific, technological, economic paradigm. Just want to say that I was totally convinced about what Janavi wrote in the chat about diversity and inclusion. I'm going to look at that with whole new eyes again. I also copied a link to a new article on the sort of Welcome Open Science platform, which is looking at research capacity development, emphasizing the importance of taking political and historical perspective. I thought Gladys's presentation was fantastic. And maybe what we can all do in this very complex area is trying to understand, but also trying to make change in a small way in the areas where we can do that. Okay, thanks everybody very much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. The only reason I'm speeding along is because of the time, but you know, hopefully we can still continue these conversations. And I also see that Nelly's posed a really interesting comment as well in the chat. I think it's, I think I can see Wafa's hand up. So yes, Gladys and then Wafa, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Nabil. I wanted to address the issue of decolonizing the knowledge in our university systems. As Janavi addressed, how do we do this? Because if we are not going to address the root cause, this is where we learn in our education system, and that is the place that we need to decolonize. And I'm excited about how KM4Dev we are doing in addressing the issues, cutting across all the sectors. And education system is a place that we need to focus. Even the issues of gender equity, the issues of corruption, the issues of ethnicity, and even racism. This is where we learn. And I think also we need to go back to our homes, to our villages. We need to decolonize these things, because as we grow, this is the knowledge that we are learning from our peers, and we grow with this kind of a knowledge and the perception about this with that mindset. So it is something that, as we address the issue of decolonization, let's go back and check the root causes about these things. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say that my experience definitely mirrors Juliet's, in the sense of, like, engineers and scientists, in my experience, aren't even asking any questions about the politics of knowledge, or even considering that knowledge is anything but, like, objectively true. So it'll be really interesting once we have these conversations of, like, how can we create that pathway to these conversations for those people. But I guess thinking a bit about the question of, like, what is colonial about science, I feel like linked to what Nelly put in the chat about kind of like the purpose of science within the kind of colonial project. I think, to me, I feel that the focus on the process of what science is, so like lab-based, reproducible, quite separate from culture and separate from understandings that, you know, our local kind of environment has about our place in the world. I think often kind of my understandings about pre-colonial versions of science, technology, and innovation often are deeply linked to these kind of like socio-cultural kind of realities of those spaces. I feel like modern science is very much about measuring, quantifying, and organizing things in order to then control nature, and I think that control of nature is also based in this like man-nature dualism that is again part of this kind of knowledge, this theory of knowledge, and I think that's again something that we maybe wouldn't see in all kind of pre-colonial cultures. A lot of them have like a much more kind of connected relationship to nature, and therefore the way that they use science to engage with nature is kind of completely different. Yeah, I think the question that I have around decolonizing science is the fact that it seems like a lot of what is lost in colonial versions of science and that we can gain from kind of pre-colonial versions is about the context of knowledge creation and application, and kind of the fact that there's like a deeper relationship, and that has a lot of value, I think. And we talk about like, you know, like local forms of knowledge around agriculture or around maintaining ecosystems. I guess the question that maybe kind of a lot of people, I guess, in my sort of department would have is like, is it possible to scale that, to transfer that, and to make it like more widely applicable? Maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe science doesn't have to be kind of something that any piece of science is something that everyone across the world can engage with. But obviously, part of kind of like the logic of current scientific methods is about it being like a piece of information that's just true everywhere. Should we even let go of that notion of truth? I think that's part of the colonial thing as well. So I guess these are all just questions. There was a lot of random thoughts, but these are the kind of questions that I think emerge for me around the kind of like, you know, realization of a decolonial perspective on science.
Thank you very much, Wafa, for some really great reflections there. And thanks everyone for the integration of your thoughts in the chat as well. That's really, really excellent. I know we're coming towards the end of our time. I just wanted to give an opportunity to some of the WASH colleagues here. So that's the water and sanitation engineering folks, especially core. I wondered if you wanted to share any resources. I know that there's been some excellent work on decolonizing the WASH sector, including knowledge. So I just wanted to flag if you'd like me to put some links in the chat, or if you have any reflections briefly before we're closing.
Yes, I just had to unmute. Well, I'd just like to give maybe two quick, very practical examples of decolonizing knowledge, which I have seen. And one is of a journal, the IWA Journal of Water Science, Water, Sanitation and Hygiene for Development. So for any submissions, they say submissions reporting on work undertaken in a country other than that of residence or citizenship of the authors may be rejected if they haven't actively engaged and included co-authors from the country concerned. And those contributions should be significant and not just for collecting data. So I think that's one positive way of decolonizing research, at least that has been undertaken in developing countries by people from the north. And the other example I think is quite good is that there are the Makerere University, the Resilient Africa Network. They offer courses on grant writing and management, focusing on USAID's granting mechanisms. So often there's people in the north who can get the grants. They don't really involve people from the south. There are initiatives to change that and help people from the south to get access to those grants as well. So that's just what I would like to share. Thank you.
Thanks. Should we have, I just remember Ishan, Janavi, and then, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to discuss some of the things that Janvi mentioned and others have also mentioned, because I think I largely agree, and I'm really glad that those things were brought up. But I thought I'd just clarify a few things. So when I was speaking about coloniality or present day coloniality, I was specifically speaking about how economic or governmental processes developed during former colonialism would have shaped current economic processes in which we may call neo-colonial, I guess today, and then have also been shaped by formal decolonization. So there is a distinction there as well. I guess I was being quite flippant about the whole thing, but just as an example, I would think of mining aluminium, a metal widely used in scientific research, rubber for gaskets and so on, or uranium mining, which is a solution. Uranium mining for fission reactions is a solution that we love in science, a lot of people, but they don't think about so they want to do research in fission reactions, but then also not realizing the coloniality that, or colonial processes through which it comes to be that this material can be mined in this other part of the world. People can be displaced, the legislation used, the policing tools used, and all this stuff, so that people are displaced, and then materials are mined. Thinking specifically for aluminium companies like Vedanta in India, engaged in these processes. So how do these materials come into our labs? That's those processes that make those materials come into our labs, the labor processes and so on. The transport processes as well, I would describe as neo-colonial. And I think that's something where something we should be doing some decolonization, thinking of the ways in which big science is possible in Europe specifically, and go that and sort of changing that. And then also the cultural hegemony of science, I think, again, very important. I've been thinking about this a bit in terms of the work I was doing when we were writing, when we were doing teaching in schools. It's going to be it's an important debate and a contestation already, who gets to write the truth. I think this played in quite interestingly during COVID, especially in the UK and also India, actually, when what Modi was saying and so on around many things. But sticking to the UK, the government scientific advisor would use this cultural hegemony of science, to tell the truth. They were following the science. What does the science say? And this is clear that to someone that's doing science and discussing this with scientists, they know they can interpret this and know that this is a performance and so on. But this is not the same for people that don't have that same relationship with the processes and the methods of science, the knowledge, being able to do science, I guess. So this is quite dangerous, of course, because the population isn't trained in science. And also, this is not something that people are encouraged to do while they're doing science, especially at school. And we know this because of our experiences from teaching science in schools. It's taught in a very sort of authoritative way. You have a relationship to learning the facts, and you don't engage in a process of theorization about phenomena. That's not something we do. So, and then lastly, which is related to the previous point about culture, about hegemony, is this point of inclusion, which you mentioned, which is also something I was thinking about while we were doing that work, and the colleagues that I was doing it with for 4 years. And then that sort of was quite difficult for us because this is what the project we were doing, and then we sort of moved on to different things, doing race and colonialism, but we still continue to do workshops. So, and the reason is kind of simple. I mean, we were doing these workshops in schools, and the school students were, the workshops have been evolving, and we could clearly tell that the students were good for them because they were engaging with science differently. They were asking more questions about being more critical and so on. And as we did more of them, they got better, and it didn't feel right to just stop providing that support within school, especially someone that we could do it, just because we didn't want them to be included. I think our understanding of what it meant to include these students into our departments to do a decolonization project has also shifted. That's not the only reason we were teaching them science. We're also teaching them science so they could enjoy the things that we like to enjoy as well. And then this then evolves into some of the last round of workshops we did before COVID, which were more on sort of science, statistics, and society. I started moved into teaching statistics a bit more because through that we could do exercising of interpreting popular statistics that were related to their life. So, for example, school grades, A-level grades, and so on, and then contextualizing that within sort of funding and so on. So, being able to show students and teach them how to firstly calculate these statistics, process these statistics, understand these statistics, access them on the internet, and so on, and then how to sort of critically engage with them, and similarly on sort of stop and search statistics as well. But yeah, I don't know if that's my bit. That answers any of the questions.
Yeah, I know we're going over, so if anyone has to leave, which we're going to aim to wrap up in the next few moments, but I think given the time, maybe we'll have Janabi and then Andrea, Gladys, and Jocelyn, maybe some final points, and then close.
Thanks, Nabila. I'll be quick. So Ishan, thanks for that. I think that was very useful, your experience with teaching. So I think, this is what I mean by separating things out. So, science education is flawed. Public engagement with science is flawed. We do not peddle enough in public debate that scientific knowledge is uncertain. There are limits to knowledge. There are limits to knowing. Truth claims are underdetermined by evidence, but that doesn't make them false. And I think that dichotomy is what needs to be broken. So it's not about, it's not about one or the other, right? It's about constantly pushing that boundary or that limit that we know exists and asking critical questions. It's not about denying it, right? Because I'd like, when Wafa said, for example, science's claims about being true everywhere, I'd like those things to be true that are claimed to be true, right? And if then they're not, I'd like to have the ability to ask those questions, and I'd like those who claim that to be true to be ready to be open and ready for questioning and to reform or reformulate their knowledge or their truth claims because we found evidence to the contrary, or our questions made them see things differently, right? It's because it's scary, and that's what I meant. The ending question that I had in my presentation: are all truth claims equal? Is all knowledge the same? Are all knowledge claims the same? And I hope how I would answer it is probably clear. It's not an easy dichotomy to navigate, right? It's not an either or situation. I think one's got to take things in a very responsible manner. One's got to navigate that territory in a very responsible manner, and one has got to take experimental knowledge seriously, because it's controlled and it's happening in a lab, or because it's extractive and happening in a mine. It doesn't. There isn't an automatic conclusion that takes it to everything, at that extreme, right? And actually on us, right? Because we are scholars, and we are scholars either in STEM or in fields that comment on STEM, like myself, science and technology studies, history of science. And I think it's, let's not work with these binaries, and let's not assign an equivalence of knowledge to every claim that is laid in front of us. I'd like to be able to say, no, the earth is not flat. I'd like to be able to say, I took an extreme example, but even vaccines, right? I'd like to know, what does it mean when you say it is efficacious in this and this manner? I'd like to be able to make an informed decision. I'd like to have the intellectual tools to be able to make that decision. So I think that it's a slippery terrain, and that's why I just keep wanting us to kind of not go down that route so easily.
We have Andrea, Gladys, and Jocelyn, maybe very, very small insights. And thank you so much, Janavi and Ishan, for your points.
Sure. I just to say thank you very much. It's been really interesting to be part of this conversation. The chat has just been amazing. There are so many different interesting points there. What I can take away from this is that even within this conversation around decolonizing STEM, there seems to be very different interpretations around what decolonization is. It seems that something that diversity and inclusion could be an entry point, and some don't think that. And I think what I take from this is the need for more critical discussions, for more interdisciplinary debates as well, so that we can learn from all of the different experiences. So that's my kind of takeaway from this discussion. And I just want to say thank you for everybody and for sharing your thoughts.
Gladys, would you like to go, and then Jocelyn?
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, everyone, for organizing such a great session. And it's so wonderful that here we have all the teams across different continents. And I'm happy that here we have Africa here. And the way forward, this is an amazing session that perhaps maybe we need to continue having such kind of a discussion. And also, as Sarah Cummings shared that here, we have such kind of a space, and all of us has a role to advocate for change. And this is the way forward now. As a future, what you're talking about this and championing in addressing the issues of decolonization of knowledge. And perhaps maybe even in future, we need to create a session where we can have those even marginalized students from such communities where they can have a session with other international communities. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, yes, thanks Nabila and Sally for organizing such an interesting workshop, and to everyone for discussing. It's really interesting how like talking about politics and kind of this hegemony of like what knowledge is accepted and not accepted, that I think is the main issue with STEM. But I think kind of moving forward with like how one can try and approach the many different ways of interpreting decolonization, as well as I think just having people in the departments to kind of support what different ways of moving forward. And I really appreciate that in our department having the postdocs and lecturers and professors kind of take charge and kind of chart the way, so that as PhD students who don't feel in positions of power at times as well are able to make our voices heard, and that space is so valuable. And I feel like that despite the many different interpretations of whether EDI is decolonizing or not, it's still one step towards a better and fairer world. Really, yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me and having such a lovely discussion.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry we kind of had to rush and overspill. What we will do is hopefully people will agree to share emails so you can continue conversations with each other, sorry. And obviously we'll circulate the recording, but also this chat, which is so rich. We've been copy pasting it, so we will circulate a transcript, perhaps edit it a bit, because there are so many rich links and discussion points here itself. So don't worry about the kind of brevity of all of this. Just also wanted to say, such a lovely opportunity to learn and to bring together PhD students and more senior colleagues and people from all over the world. And I think that kind of striving towards that goal of clarity and disentangling, which everyone's been kind of talking about, that's a long kind of journey, but perhaps just, these critical discussions, this is a really good way to think about it. I won't say begin thinking about it, because I know everyone's been thinking about it for a while, but yeah, really happy to have been a part of this. Thank you so much for your time and bearing with us. Sally, you can have the last word. Sorry.
No, just to say thank you, Nabila, also for the other great events you've organised on the topic here. So big shout out on that, and thank you so much everybody for joining us today. And I've learned